it's interesting what's happening inside of me each week as I think about, these are our Bible readings for the past week. I'd like to develop a sermon in context with that week's readings. And not by design, just kind of the way it's working out, is that some of the weeks the sermon is kind of an overview, maybe the whole book, major themes in the whole book. I've done that a few times, and I've enjoyed it a great deal. I like that kind of sermon. But then there's been other weeks like today where one small part of the week's reading, some particular smaller subject within that week's reading, captures my attention. And I like that as well, because it's in the details of the larger story that makes the larger story better by looking at some of the details. And this last week, one of the things that really captured my attention, I'll invite you to turn with me to Numbers chapter 10. I could have gone to Numbers chapter 2, and both of them are descriptions of the 12 tribes and how they were situated around the tabernacle. And it would be good to have an image of that up today, I guess. Maybe that'll be one of my images for next week. There were 3 tribes on each of the 4 sides of the tabernacle, for a total of 12. And then the Levites, there were 3 sons of Levi. So his 3 sons, they divided up on 3 sides of the tabernacle, but not on the entrance. That's the east side. Because on the east side was Moses and Aaron's sons, the priests. So the priests and the Levites were also scattered around the tabernacle. And what I want you to notice in this reading, and the thing that captured my attention, I'm calling the title of this sermon, The Banner of God's People. Banner. Some of your Bibles may say standards. Some of them may say ensigns, E-N-S-I-G-N, which is simply from an ancient word that means a sign in the land. So it's a land sign to identify your location and identify who you are. In our modern language, we call them flags, but we think more of flags as flags of nations, whereas these were flags of each tribe, and each tribe had their own different flag. And on that flag would be an emblem, a creature or something that identified that tribe, but the flag would also have its own color. And we're not told some of this in the Bible, but this is Jewish history and it's pretty reliable. It makes sense that the color of each of the tribe's flags was based on the color of the precious stone that was in the breastplate of the high priest. And the high priest had this little breastplate, and he had 12 precious stones, 4 rows of 3. And it was 12 different precious stones. Each of them were of different color. We're not told again in the Bible, but we are told in Jewish history, and pretty reliable, which tribe had which stone. That's one of those things, in my mind, and these are the things that we shouldn't fuss about too much with God. But, I wish it was described in the Bible which stone was with what tribe, but it's not. But we do know that each tribe had a different stone, and each tribe had a different symbol, and both of those were on their particular flag. But those 4 groups of 3 around the tabernacle, each one of those groups had a lead tribe. Judah, and then two others. Reuben, and then two others. Ephraim, on the back side of the Holy of Holies, on the west side, and then two others. And then Dan and two others on the north side. And then the three Levite sons, their people on three sides. And then Moses and Aaron in the front, where Judah and his group was. And those lead tribes had their own flags that identified them. And we know at least two of them are connected to Scripture. So we know we're correct on Judah and Ephraim. Now, Dan and Reuben, we're not told in the Bible what kind of symbol are connected to their tribes, but again, we're able to deduce it. I'm going to walk you through that and talk about the meaning of the banners of God's people. And I need you to stick with me in the beginning. We're going to look at some scriptures to start laying out the evidence. And as we go along in the sermon, I'm going to start trying to apply it more spiritually and apply it to us today. So just stick with me. Some basic information to get started with. Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. Now it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month, in the second year. So we're looking at about a year that they were at Mount Sinai. Just a few days under a year, because they came to Mount Sinai on the first day of the third month. So 10 days short of a full year at Mount Sinai. In the second year, that the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel set out from the wilderness of Sinai on their journeys, and the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So they started out for the first time, meaning from Mount Sinai, according to the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. And then verse 14 says, the standard, yours may say ensign, or banner, or flag, but you get the idea. Mine says standard, of the camp of the children of Judah, set out first according to their armies, and then their names Issachar and Zebulun were the other two tribes with them. And then you go down to verse 18, and the standard of the camp of Reuben set out according to their armies, and they were on the south side of the tabernacle. And then you go down to verse 22, and the standard of the camp of the children of Ephraim. So they were on the west side, which would be on the back side of the Holy of Holies. And then you go down to verse 25, then the standard of the camp of the children of Dan. So that'd be, as you're looking at the entrance of the tabernacle, and I often liken the tabernacle to this sanctuary, because I think it fits the idea that it's about twice as long as it is wide. And I don't know the exact dimensions, but we're close to that. So it gives you an idea of kind of the tabernacle was a rectangle, and three tribes on each side. Now, we do know that Judah, on the entrance to it, on the east side, where Moses and Aaron and the priests were, we do know that his symbol was a lion. Now, how do we know that his symbol was a lion? Well, first of all, we know Christ came from the tribe of Judah, and Christ is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So that makes it pretty obvious. The lion was their symbol. But it goes all the way back to when Jacob blessed his 12 sons before he died. And he says in Genesis chapter 49 and verse 9, he's talking about his son Judah, and he said, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion who shall arouse him. So obviously, from then on, people would associate Judah with the symbol of a lion. And then Jesus came from that. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So that's very concrete, isn't it? Judah was the lion. And then we go to the opposite side, right behind the Holy of Holies, Ephraim. And of course, the reason we're told about Ephraim and Judah and their symbols is because those two sons are the two sons that the birthright blessing passed through. Ephraim from Joseph, and Joseph was given the birthright blessing of the firstborn, even though he was not the firstborn, but he was given it. Other than the rulership part of the blessing was given to Judah, that King David and so forth came from. So those two sons are given the birthright blessing, and we have the symbol of those two tribes, and that was on their flag. And from Ephraim, we have to go to where Moses blessed the 12 tribes just before he died. That would be in Deuteronomy chapter 33. I like to be able to back up what I say with scripture, so we're kind of orderly going through this a little bit to lay a foundation. Deuteronomy 33 and verse 17. And he's talking about the sons of Joseph, which would be Ephraim and Manasseh. And it says in verse 17 of 33 of Deuteronomy, his glory is like a firstborn bull, and his horns like the horns of the wild ox. And that's applied to both Ephraim and Manasseh, but Ephraim was the lead tribe, not Manasseh. And so from that point on, Ephraim became connected with a cow or an ox. So we have the lion and we have the ox of the two most important tribes as far as the birthright blessing. But we're not told in the Bible about Reuben, and he was on the south side, but his symbol, according to Jewish tradition and history, and it's pretty accurate, was a man's head. And then on the opposite side, on the north, would have been Dan, and his was an eagle. So remember this with me. Lion, Judah, man's head, Reuben, ox or cow, Ephraim, and eagle for Dan. Those four symbols. Why are they so important? Turn over to Exodus chapter 36 with me. This really becomes, a lot of times the Bible needs to be approached this way, a little bit here, a little bit there. Start plugging them in together to get the full picture. And so it takes some work. You got to put on your, get your magnifying glass out, your detective magnifier out, your detective hat, and start looking for these things. In Exodus 36, in verse 8, then all the gifted artisans among them who worked on the tabernacle made 10 curtains woven of fine linen and of blue, purple, and scarlet thread with artistic designs of cherubim. Cherubim, they made them. So cherubim, pictures of the cherubim. That's an order of angels, isn't it? One angel is a cherub. Put I am on any Hebrew word, it makes it plural. So cherubim is a group of cherubs, an order of angels. And they were built into the design of the tabernacle, but especially where? Where were cherubims most important in the tabernacle? On top of the Ark of the Covenant, on the mercy seat lid, 2 large cherubim overshadowed the mercy seat. Now, what's that got to do with these 4 symbols? Turn to Ezekiel chapter 1 with me. We're still playing detective here. We're putting these things together, and it draws a beautiful picture. Ezekiel chapter 1, and it talks about the cherubim here. They're called 4 living creatures, identified as cherubim. And it says in verse 6, each one had 4 faces. So that on each side of them, they had a different face, totaling 4. And it says in verse 10, and the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man, each of the 4 had the face of a lion, Each of the four had the face of an ox, and each of the four had the face of an eagle. Lo and behold, the four lead tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, and the symbols on their flags were exactly the same as the four faces on the cherubim above the mercy seat. Now, something inside of you should start at least asking the question, there's a real important reason for that connection. Look at Revelation chapter 4. Now John is looking in heaven at the throne of God, the angels worshiping around the throne. And it says in Revelation chapter 4 and verse 4, around the throne were 24 thrones, and on the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads. And there's a debate as to who these 24 elders are. I don't have a problem with making them represent the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles of the New Testament church. So the people of God in the Old Testament, the people of God in the New Testament. That's as good as anything I've ever come across. And from the throne proceeded lightnings, thunders, voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are on the 7. I started a little early, excuse me. I started back in verse 4. In verse 6, before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second living creature like a calf or oxen or cow. The third living creature had the face of a man, and the fourth living creature was like the flying eagle. So you're going all the way now into the future, looking into the throne of God leading up to the end times, and these same creatures are there that were designed to be built into the tabernacle and later the temple. But it's also outside the tabernacle with the leading tribe of each group of 4 different groups. Now let's start tying some of this together. Even though, so you have these 4 images on the outside of the tabernacle with these 4 different groups. But you also have these same 4 images on the inside in the Holy of Holies with these 2 cherubim, with the 4 faces, having the same images as those on the outside. So how does that tie together? Well, one thing it ties together is the intimate connection that the presence of God in the Holy of Holies between the cherubim above the mercy seat had with the same images of those camped around the tabernacle. You understand what I'm saying? This intimate connection. He's tying together what's outside with what's inside. I and my people are together. I am their God. I preached a couple of weeks ago in Exodus 19 about Mount Sinai, and that covenant God made with them was a marriage contract. This is also displaying that marriage contract. The 2 are one. Outside, the people, inside God, but we have the same 4 images tying us together. And here's what ties it together. Turn to Exodus chapter 17. So they each had their own image on their flag, but what was the one thing that tied all of those together? Exodus 17, after they had defeated the Amalekites, that was their first battle outside of Egypt. And God told Moses in verse 14 of chapter 17, then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book, recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, And Moses built an altar and called its name Jehovah Nissi. Jehovah is God's name. Nissi is Hebrew for the Lord is my banner. So they had their individual banners, but with the tabernacle in the midst of them, they were to recognize that, yes, these banners identify our tribe, but the real banner we all have tying us together is the Lord. He's our true banner. Not the one we have on our flag. Yes, it is. But the true banner is the Lord Himself. This is a subject that it's easy to chase a lot of rabbits, and I chased some rabbits this week. I love researching side rabbits when I'm studying a Bible subject. And I got to studying the subject of the use of flags and banners in history among nations. And for many centuries, it was not to identify a nation. It was used among armies to identify the different groups within that army. And these banners of these 12 tribes, one thing that's missed a lot about Israel's journey, those 40 years in the wilderness, you start numbering and researching the number of battles they fought. We think of these, 600,000 men of fighting age. There's a reason why the Bible repeats that several times. 600,000 men of fighting age. Because they had to fight a lot of battles. And we tend to think they were just kind of a ragtag bunch of people, former slaves, barely making their way to the promised land. They were a trained army. They fought a lot of battles and won them against powerful groups of people in the wilderness. And one of the things you'll find out about the use of flags, standards, emblems, colors, is that you divide the army up into groups for military purposes. Israel was one of the first nations, maybe the first nation, I don't know, that actually used military strategy. You recall the times you've read through the Old Testament and they're getting ready to go out to battle, and God says to them, okay, divide this group over here. Okay, take this group and move around behind them. Okay, move this group on top of the hill and hide and wait for the enemy to come out and then swoop down on top of them. God used military strategy. And how do you use military strategy? When you're in the middle of the fog of war. One way you do it is through the use of different flags. Practically, it's really easy to be separated from your own army or your own group in the fog of war. So one of the main things you do is if you find yourself without your own people around you to help defend yourself, you start looking for your flag. And you realize, I'm going to head toward that flag. That's my people. And then you can regroup and fight a better battle. So flags are used for military strategy, and Israel did for their own use. Armies still do it today. Turn with me to Isaiah chapter 5. I'm still developing this and going to try to tie it all together pretty quick because it really is a beautiful subject. Isaiah chapter 5, this is speaking about the end times. 5:26. It says in verse 25, to go back and get the thought, therefore the anger of the Lord is aroused against his people. He has stretched out his hand against them and stricken them, and the hills trembled. Their carcasses were as refuse in the streets of the city, in the midst of the streets. Okay, that's his people. And here's a statement used a number of times in the Old Testament. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Stretched out not in love and forgiveness, stretched out in judgment is the idea of this term. But now he turns to the nations. He will lift up a banner to the nations from afar and will whistle to them from the ends of the earth, and they will come swiftly. And then it goes on to talk about he defeats them in battle. He's basically saying to the nations here I am, come get me. I'm ready to do battle. That's exactly what it's going to be like when Christ returns. And then turn to chapter 13 of Isaiah. The burden against Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw, lift up a banner on the high mountain. Raise your voice to them. Wave your hand that they may enter the gates of the nobles. Again, the idea is, let them see where you are. Draw them into battle. This verse is very much like Zechariah 14. Behold, I will gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. He's wanting to draw them in. Ezekiel 38 and 39, those battle of Gog and Magog, several times it says about those nations that will come against Jerusalem, he says, I will put hooks in their jaws and drag them there. He's not holding them back. He's dragging them to the battle. Those battles of the end times, the last 7 years, even the Battle of Armageddon, to some degree, a lot of nations are saying, like we're trying to say right now to the rest of the world, we want peace. We don't want war. We're tired of people being killed, countries being destroyed. We don't want to do battle. And it appears to me that other nations are trying to draw us in. And I hope it doesn't work. But God says there will be many nations that just kind of want to stay out of it. But I have a reason to bring all nations together for one last showdown. And I will put hooks in their jaws and drag them there. They'll come kicking and screaming, but they're going to come. Verse 3, I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have also called my mighty ones for my anger, those who rejoice in my exaltation, the noise of a multitude in the mountains, like that of many people, tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. This is exactly Zechariah 14. The Lord of hosts musters the army for battle. Both sides, he musters both sides, his own army and the other that they're going to defeat. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, the Lord and his weapons of indignation to destroy the whole land. Wait, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be limp. Every man's heart will melt. No wonder he has to put a hook in their jaw and drag them there. Who wants to be a part of this? They will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth, which is an analogy that's often used leading up to the return of Christ and the Great Tribulation. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames. Behold, the day of the Lord comes. The day of the Lord is his actual coming, but that's when the final battle is fought. Cruel with both wrath and fierce anger to lay the land desolate. He will destroy its sinners from it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. Jesus speaks about this in Matthew 24. The cosmic signs that happen just before he returns. The sun will be darkened in its going forth. The moon will not cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil. And there's a whole lot of evil stuff going on right now, isn't there? A lot of evil stuff. Corruption, greed beyond what's right, willing to let nations be destroyed, willing to let hundreds of thousands of young men be killed just to line their pockets and to gain more power. Just a lot of evil going on right now, much more than we realize It's demonic. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud. That's always built into these judgment passages, the pride of humans and the need to be brought down. I will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a mortal more rare than fine gold, a man than the gold of the wedges of Ophir. Therefore, I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts and in the day of his fierce anger. But a banner is set up. Let's pick up another reason for these banners. And I won't dwell on this much, but it is an important aspect of it. They each have their own banner, their own symbol, their own color. So at least 12 of them, than whatever the tribe of Levi had. And yet, those 4 different images were one in the face of the cherubim in the Holy of Holies. And this is a subject I brought up quite a bit through the years. I don't think it's understood properly, but I think it's really vital. The institutions that God created all have this built into them, and that is what I call unity in the midst of diversity. He wants unity in marriage, but he has diverse roles for husband and wife and children. He wants there to be love and harmony in the home, but that doesn't mean each member of that home is exactly the same. He designed it different than that. He wants their in them being faithful to their separate roles, they are promoting the unity of the family. He built that into the nation of Israel. Remember, we just read that long, 89 verses? Chapter 7. And it went through each tribe and what they brought as their contribution to dedicate the tabernacle. And every one of the 12 tribes brought exactly the same thing. We're equal, but we're different. The Lord lets us have our own symbol. Each tribe is a different size. Each tribe has its strengths and weaknesses. But we're united around the tabernacle and the presence of God. He called some to be kings and priests and prophets. But they were not above the people. They were actually servants to the people. But they played different roles. But it was to be one holy nation. He embedded that in the church. Different roles. 1 Corinthians 12 talks all about the human body and the different parts of the body, and they each have their own separate function, but it's for the purpose of the unity of the working of the body. And I think that principle is going to be carried over into the millennial in different ways. I won't get into that this morning. Unity in the midst of diversity. But I said in the beginning, my subject was the banners of God's people. In the tabernacle, it was the Lord is our banner. We also have our own banners of identity, of organization, of warfare, all the different analogies of what we represent in our service to God. What is our banner? Turn to Song of Solomon with me. Song of Solomon. The Song of Solomon may have different applications. I say it is literally a marriage manual for human marriages. But it's also a picture of Christ and His church, Christ and His people, the love that they are to have one for another. And the Shulamite woman represents the church or the saints. Of course, the beloved man represents Christ. And in chapter 2, of course, we like verse 1. I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. Like a lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. She answers and says, like an apple tree among the trees of the woods, so is my beloved among the sons. I sat down in his shade with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. What a pleasant picture that draws. And then she says to the daughters of Jerusalem in verse 4, he brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. We have a banner, don't we? That banner we have is the love of Christ. That's our identity. That's our weapon. That's our strength. That's our purpose. His banner over me was love. Jesus said it this way to his church in the upper room just before his arrest and trial and death. He looked at them and said, by this, in my mind, I'm putting the word banner there. By this banner, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. So our banner is that Christ, the love of Christ to us, and our love to each other. That's our banner. That's our identity. That's our flag. By this, love for one another. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples. Let's apply this now to Christ. As you know, and I have said many times, these kind of subjects have several layers to them, and each of those layers are important. And in this case, those four images are not just about the tribes and their identity and their connection to the four faces in the Holy of Holies, that intimate connection of God and his people. But these four images can be directly applied to Christ. Reuben was the man's head, a human being. The only one of the four images that was human. And Christ had to come as a human. He had to come as a man. He had to die as a man. He had to suffer as a man. He had to go through everything as a man in order to be a faithful high priest to us. He had to go through everything on our behalf. So Christ is the man of the image of Reuben. But in his second coming, he is as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, conquering king. So in those two, you have the incarnation of, you have the God-man, the lion representing him as divine, the man represented him as human. And you go to the opposite side on the west, the oxen, which is universally in every culture a symbol of strength. Certainly that applies to Christ. And then on the north side, the eagle, which is a picture of him as a heavenly being. And I'll close with this one thought, because I'll let you tie this together. There's something fascinating about Dan on the north side in the group of three. Dan's symbol was an eagle. But if you go back to Jacob pronouncing blessings on his 12 sons and later Moses to the 12 tribes, Dan is there pictured with the symbol of a snake. There's something about this dual picture in this one tribe of a snake and an eagle. And I did a little bit of research on that. Of course, the snake would be like the symbol of Satan, the serpent in the garden, and especially of the Antichrist, the enemy of Christ, the snake. And that great promise in Genesis 3:15, the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the seed of the serpent. So this idea of killing the serpent. So Dan was a snake in those earlier descriptions, but now his symbol is an eagle. And there's something in there in my research that said most animal experts, who study the animal world extensively, claim that an eagle, the number one enemy of snakes, are eagles. There's something about snakes that eagles love. They can see him from a distance. The snake doesn't even know what hit it. He's got a good, easy meal. So snakes, I don't know if they feel things, but if we put human qualities to them, they're more afraid of eagles than they are of anything. So in that one tribe, you have both this picture of Christ and Antichrist, the snake and the eagle. And how that as they went on, they took on the symbol of an eagle and left off the symbol of a snake. Kind of picturing that the eagle overcomes the snake. See, there's something really there that you can develop in your own mind. I don't want to take it too far. But the eagle is coming back in judgment. There's something about an eagle that's majestic, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's deadly. And all those things picture Christ in his second coming. And in his second coming, he's going to kill the head of the snake, isn't he? So these are things that as we're reading through, some of these things just start jumping out at me. And just a simple development of this idea of these flags, these symbols, these colors, it's much more than just about identity. It's about deeper spiritual truth, connection to the God of the Holy of Holies, of the future of the coming of their Messiah and his ultimate victory in his second coming. And as we read through, we're reading about their continual times of rebellion, lack of faith, God having to judge them in different ways. And we shake our head, don't we? We say, they just saw all these miracles. They just saw this morning, God opened up the earth and swallowed Korah and that whole group and killed those other 250 and just swallowed them up alive. And the very next statement is, the people complained against Moses and said, "Why have you killed our brethren?" You would think those events would cause them to, as we say, straighten up and fly right. But yet, I imagine the Lord looks down at us and sometimes thinks, why do they so easily go astray? Why does their faith weaken so quickly? Why do they take their eyes off of me instead of and relying on their own strength and wisdom? So as you're shaking your head at them, maybe some of them are in heaven looking down, shaking their head at us and wishing they could cry out from heaven, "You're making the same mistake we made. Stop it." The banners of God's people. His banner over me is love. Do you know the love of Christ in your heart? Do you need the love of Christ in your heart? You can have it if you'll humble yourself, give your heart to Him. We're going to have a verse of invitation song.